All right, welcome to Firepunk Racing Series, Part 3. This is the UCC edition. We're going to start kind of taking off from the diesel power challenges that we finished in 2015, and we had kind of found out that we were not going to be able to compete in DPC again, and that's when I had got an email from James Brendel, and they said that they were calling me out, basically, because they were doing what they called the Ultimate Callout Challenge, collaborated with Diesel World Magazine, and they were calling out the top 30 trucks in the nation to all get together in the West and compete against each other. This time, instead of being a street truck challenge, this was pretty much no rules other than 4,500 pound minimum weight for racing and 8,000 pound maximum weight.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 8,500 pound, I can't remember for sure, for sled pulling. And there was only 3 events: dyno, drag race, and sled pull.
Yep.
And so they had kind of laid that out, and that's where we were like, what do we do now?
Well, yeah, that's when we started looking at the fact that there's only 3 events now. Takes the street truck thing out of it, and we don't have the, like DPC, we had to be the same weight the whole time. Couldn't change tires, you couldn't do any of that kind of stuff. So street truck, we felt like we had it figured out, but this felt like a whole different ball game. So we decided to sit down and start thinking outside the box, I guess.
Right, because there was no driver, there was no real, per se, driver skill that was going to be an advantage. There wasn't really the smaller turbos that give you better drivability advantage, and now we were like, man, the quad cab is kind of outclassed for this challenge, because now we got a truck that weighs 7,700 pounds, and we're going to get our butts whooped if we show up in Salt Lake City, Utah with this heavy truck. Even if it has 2,000 horsepower, you can't overcome weight. You know, It's like you're only going to go so fast.
This was at the point in time where 2,000 horsepower was about like 3,000 is now. Like
right.
There was, I don't know, had it been touched on a chassis dyno?
I think Industrial had a couple of 2,000 horsepower claims, and that was when it was like, that's just an out west number. They got a 17% or correction factor. There's no way that that's an accurate number. You bring that truck back east, it's not going to make 2,000 horsepower. So the people on the East Coast were discrediting the West Coast numbers, and that's really why the Ultimate Callout Challenge was such a huge. This was perfect, because this settles the score between East versus West, and you bring all the big names together and you say, knock them out. Same dyno, same day, same drag strip, same day. Right. It was exciting.
So as far as like East Coast versus West Coast correction factor, now that we've done it, like what's your thoughts on East Coast numbers versus West Coast numbers? Like, is that correction factor a real deal, or is that a joke?
I think it's the real deal. People really underestimate the thin air out west, and the main reason I say that is because we drove Larson's truck out there, and we dynoed it on our dyno as like no correction factor. It was a good clean air day here in Ohio, and we're at 900 feet or 800 feet, and I think it made within 20 horsepower of what we made here in Ohio with no correction factor that it did on industrial injection dyno with 17% correction factor up at elevation. So that tells me that East versus West, if you're in the West, the correction factor is needed to get an accurate representation of what you're going to make down at elevation.
I think the dyno probably makes more of a difference than, corrected versus non-corrected. Like, I remember going to ATS and they do uncorrected numbers, and it was brutal, which that's also a really strong, Mustang dyno that really didn't let you accelerate the drum fast, whereas you get on a small roller dyno, and if it doesn't have much of a brake, you can really wing that thing a lot. And on something like that, you don't fight traction near as much. So traction and the way the brake is set up and all that stuff really comes into play a lot more, and really just experience being on a dyno.
Right.
Like a dyno is kind of like playing a game just like anything else. Your dyno number, at the end of the day, you get a number, but it's not necessarily going to translate to drag racing or sled pulling as such. But yet, you're in a dyno competition, you're all playing on a level field, so.
You use the dyno as a tool, and using the dyno as a tool, it's a very, very helpful tool, because it is accurate up to a certain, once you're making 2,000 horsepower on a chassis dyno, you have to come into boost so quickly that you have to accelerate your actual test window is like 2 seconds or less.
Yeah.
And it makes it really hard because if you add load, then you actually start spinning the tire because the drum's holding the truck back and it starts spinning. So you have to accelerate it fast, and if you've got a big set of turbos, you can't get it up on boost in that short window to make the number.
And really, like at this point, trying to get to that 3,000 horsepower chassis dyno number, like traction is probably the biggest hindrance to that, because, and then also trying to get everything timed so perfectly. Like you bring nitrous in too early, you're going to grenade a motor. You bring it in too late, you're not going to make a number. Or, you know, even if you bring it in too early, you might spin. So it's all about getting all that timing just right and getting everything loaded just right and all that good stuff. But that's a trail we could go down for a ways. So anyhow, we decided to go to a single cab.
Right.
And bought it in November of 15, brought it home and discovered that this thing is not as light as we thought it was going to be.
Yeah, we put the forces off my quad cab on the single cab, and we put it on corner scales, and we're like 6,930 pounds. And we were like, we're going to probably have to do some more work, because all this work swapping engines and buying a whole other truck to save 600 pounds over the quad cab wasn't really worth it.
Yep.
And that's
I just got a plasma cutter, and I was like, well, let me start cutting.
Right. I don't even know, like, our original thought was, because we weren't going to back half it.
Right.
I think we were going to do coilovers.
I think we were maybe planning to put some bedsides or something. I'm pretty sure the front clip wasn't in the works originally, but there may have been some fiberglass in the plans.
I think maybe fiberglass doors and maybe fiberglass bedsides, and I thought we were going to do coilovers on the back.
Yeah.
Because I do remember somewhere in mid-December when we had started taking this thing apart, you're like, why don't we just cut this thing at the back of the cab and just back half it? And I'm like, we have to sled pull it.
Yeah,
That's not possible.
And then we, well, I guess it wasn't at that point that we turned Comp D upside down. It was quite a bit later, because we did keep this thing under our hats pretty much the whole winter, right up until the point where we revealed it at Rudy's.
Right.
But we had a lot of fun kind of keeping the thing secret over the winter. We nicknamed it a customer's truck, so that, you know, if somebody asked,
what's that truck?
It's a customer's truck.
It's a customer's truck.
We may have, fudged the truth a little bit or whatever, but anyhow.
I just told people I'm competing with my white truck.
Yeah.
And that's why we painted it white, because it was silver when I bought it.
Right.
And that way, if I told people I'm bringing my white truck to UCC, they just assumed quad cab, because we didn't want ATS and industrial injection and fleece and all the guys that we felt that were going to be the heavy hitters that are going to beat up on us. We didn't want to get them to catch wind and be able to just be able to. We wanted to try to think outside of the box on it.
It was probably after we got back from PRI, when we came back with all kinds of bad ideas.
Right. That's where we first met TBM brakes. Yeah. And we figured out we could save, 33 pounds.
I think we saved 40 pounds per corner.
Yeah.
Just on brakes and all in rotating weight. So that was a pretty big deal. Still had factory axles, which down the road, we ended up, going to 9 inches. But at the time being, it was a pretty big deal being able to get rid of the big heavy brakes and going to smaller stuff. That allowed us to put 16-inch wheels on, and
we didn't know, like, we wanted to do all this stuff, but we knew we were still racing on foot brake, and so I didn't want to spend, $900 a corner.
Yeah.
That's a ton of money for brakes, and then get it to the racetrack and figure out we can't hold it back. And you didn't have anybody to ask, because all the guys buying these race brakes were Transbrake race cars, and nobody had done it on a four-wheel drive truck. And we just kind of felt our way through and did a lot of research. I mean, we went from taking the truck apart December 10th, I think is when we first started taking it apart, and we had the thing on the racetrack by April for testing.
Right.
So we were many sleepless nights that whole winter.
It definitely snowballed on us really fast. I'm not sure at what point that I convinced you to back half it, but the big discussion we had there is, can we back half it and still make it strong enough for sled pull? Like, we spent a lot of time kind of debating that and whether this is a smart idea or not, but we were dead determined that we were going to make this thing as light as possible, and once it's as light as possible and we have a race truck, then we're going to figure out how to sled pull it.
Right. And that's what we had called Evan Davis, He's a local guy, or semi-local, hour or so away, and he had always been very successful in sled pulling. And we're like, hey, we know you know a thing or two about sled pulling. What can you tell us about chassis? What's important in the sled pull? And he came down and kind of looked over everything. I think he even brought Adam Haley in at one point, and we kind of were like, we wanted to make sure before we cut this thing up that we
pretty
really
much
knew.
where do we need to tie stuff together?
Right.
I kind of feel like, if I remember right, when they came out, we had already started building a back half on it. And it was kind of like, where do we need to reinforce? What points? Like, how far forward do we need to go with bracing? We ended up putting these big triangle steel plates in the side of the truck that pretty much just turned it into a solid chassis. So, like, it bolted to the axle, actually bolted to our 4-link brackets, bolted to the frame up above it, and then it bolted up in the front where we had the ladder bar stuff.
Forward.
Yeah. So, really just, we bolted in a whole... solid suspension then.
Those triangular plates were also where the hitch mounted to up top. And so then we triangulated it from the top of the plates back and then down to with bars going to the axle.
We also put some weight brackets on it so we could hang some suitcase weights, because we had to find a way to go, we're adding 3,500 pounds to this truck. So can't just put it all on the nose. So we put a substantial amount up on the nose in the weight box, but put quite a bit of weight back there on the suitcase weights. But yeah, it all worked out pretty decent. The fiberglass, we learned, the cost of the fiberglass wasn't that much, but the idea of mounting it all, like once we got it, I was like, oh my goodness, I don't have wheel wells cut out. I have no idea how to mount this stuff. And for that matter, I'd never back half the truck before. And I believe it was also the first 850 cage I ever built. I'd done a couple roll bars, but we had never done an 850 cage. So I guess
you went from building your first bolt-in roll bar for the quad cab in 2015 to the first 850 cage and back half in 2016. Well, winter of 2015, 2016.
So you might say we maybe got in over our heads a little bit. I don't know, but it all worked out a little bit. And just like looking back at that first build and like the things that we didn't know, like oh my goodness.
But we bounced ideas off of people in the industry that had already gone fast. Phil Taylor had dominated or done very well in Pro Street, and he had gone like 132 60-foot in a 4-wheel drive, and I think to date that was like the fastest 60-foot time. So we're like, Phil, what's your setup? And he's like, well, I got a ladder bar setup, and we took a good look at those pictures and kind of copied that setup. We were looking for recipes. That's why we were talking to sled pullers who understood sled pulling to look for a recipe for chassis stuff and flex and what's the most important part. Look to other racers, and so we kind of kept our circle with people that we felt that were already at the top of their game.
Yeah, I remember, that winter had quite a few phone calls to Phil and to Sam Smith and a couple to Travis Grobelby. They were probably the guys that we knew that had done the most 4-wheel drive diesel racing, and so that was kind of where we bounced a lot of ideas off of, and so like that got us a good foundation, definitely gave us a good starting point. I'd probably never go back to a ladder bar truck again, but it was somewhere to start, and it was also a lot easier to learn than what a 4-link is. In
reality, the ladder bar truck can work right if you have your instant center and stuff set up perfectly, but then you really have very little adjustment if it doesn't work. Once you're actually on the racetrack, what are you going to change? There's preload and stuff you can change, but not a whole bunch like you can a 4-link, changing your instant centers around. But overall, that when he says Escalade, this whole project was not, like, I didn't have it in the budget. It was not at all in the plans. But
what was the budget? What I'm saying is like there was no budget. Like
I think we had $25,000 that we had decided that we could spend to get ready for UCC, and then January hit, and we had the best sales month ever, so we bought more parts. February, we had another record sales month, and so we bought more parts. And altogether, our $25,000 budget, I think we ended up around $66,000 invested between buying the truck and all the parts that we bought. And then we took all the stuff out of the quad cab and put it in that. And I was going to just put the stock motor that was in the regular cab in the quad cab and just turn it into a street truck. And Drew was not going to have that.
He still really wanted an enforcer in his in a street truck, because at that point the wet deck plate was still a fairly new idea. And so he thought for marketing it was a good idea to keep that in the street truck. And
so he had a block that they had tapped in the mains for 14 mil, and one of the guys got a tap started crooked, and it was a block that was kind of like a blem. And he's like, I can put another wet deck plate motor together for pretty reasonable if I can use this, because it was already machined for a girdle. It already had cam bushings in it, and he was like, it's kind of a throwaway block, but he's like, I feel like I can fix this thread. I just can't really sell it. So he ended up putting that block together for the quad cab, and that's what we ran in it for, I don't know, until we ended up cracking that block in fall of 2019.
Yeah, can't remember for sure. But
yeah, down in the main webbing, it ended up having a hairline crack, was leaking a little bit of oil, and we pulled it out.
Yeah.
But that was kind of how that whole situation happened. We set a budget, very strict budget. We sat down with all our people and figured out what we're going to do in December. And then when we got it apart, and then we're like, hey, I've got a little extra money to spend. Let's go ahead and back half it. Let's go ahead and put a front clip on it. And I remember you spent a whole week just mounting the front clip. That was something that we hadn't.
Right.
We're thinking we'd spend a day mounting the front clip, because we didn't realize that we had to trim it to fit the windshield. We had to trim it to fit the doors. We had to trim it to fit the, well, maybe not the doors, but we had to cut the fender.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the doors up across the
Right.
windshield, and then the fender wells. There was quite a bit of work there.
Fiberglass steel molding, steel bracketry to it, so we could even mount it to something. And there was a lot of things that we had no idea what really went into fitting a race truck.
Yeah, and I mean, really, it comes back to that whole like can-do mentality that we learned from Grandpa. Just kind of blindly go forward and figure it out as you go, and it all worked out. But I still to this day, I'll sit in the office and look at that plaque on the wall there, and I see the picture of the engine bay, and like I almost shake my head at it sometimes, because like we had triple CP3s,
triple 12 mils.
There was no 14 mils at that point. Yeah, it was belt driven.
Yeah,
and we had put a constant tensioner on it. We didn't quite understand, under load, how a belt's going to stretch and unload and whatever. So had quite a bit of
we threw
belt issues.
Yeah.
We had a tiny set of triple turbos on it.
Really small. Had a 468, 87, 125 T4 on the manifold, and a pair of 72, 83 1.0s on the atmosphere. And the thought process was, again, we're going to elevation, the turbos aren't going to spool out there, and they're counting horsepower and torque. Let's just load this up down low and make a huge torque number.
Right, torque's the answer to everything, right? Just make torque.
That was the answer until we broke everything, and now every time you brake, you move your power curve higher in the RPM range. And
we still, like, you look at every year of our racing, and every year, I think we get away from torque a little bit more. And I still think I remember John Robinson way back in our early days. He's like, you boys are going to learn someday that torque just breaks stuff, and he wasn't wrong.
Nope. Yeah, he was right for sure. But that was like, you look at those pictures, and it was a small turbo setup. And we had 2,211 horsepower on that, which was, we made 1960 on the engine dyno on fuel only, and then we put it in the truck and made 2,211 at UCC.
The other thing on that engine setup that really kind of makes me cringe was we had triple pumps, and nobody had like a triple fed rail.
Yeah.
And Phil was really worried about volume in the rail doing this quick dyno hit. So we had done this dual rail setup where the second rail, I think, was a Duramax rail of some sort. And you want to talk about a concoction of lines everywhere and heavy, and
we had an industrial rail with custom lines that fed each of the injectors. And then we had a second, I think it was LBZ rail, that all three pumps fed. And then there was two feed lines that came off the ends of those lines and went into the ends of the big industrial line. And so you had...
I mean, all in all, it worked.
Right.
But it was a hot mess.
The thought process behind it was, on the chassis dyno, when I dyno the quad cab, you bring it up to whatever, 2,500 RPM to start your sample, and when you floor it, you see a big drop in rail pressure, and it takes a second or two before the ECM can lower the FCA current fast enough to be able to stick the rail pressure. And that was also when we were just learning the tuning side of things, getting good at it. And so the thought process was have 3 pumps. That way, as soon as you smack it, it instantly goes to max rail pressure, and we get all the fuel quantity in there that we can.
And that was still on a factory ECM. And the first half of that year, we had no data logger.
Yeah,
We
we
were
just had the EFI. I had the tablet inside, and
but like we didn't have EGTs, we
Right.
didn't have any of that stuff.
Right.
And yeah, we've come a little a ways from that.
Right.
So anyhow, kind of enough with that. But so first one was in Utah, and that's just a couple hours from here. I think it was 31 hours. Supposed to be a 31-hour drive. I
I think it was supposed to be a 27-hour drive.
Okay.
The way home, it ended up taking over 30 hours because we had weather in Wyoming. But I remember when we left here, the weather was absolutely terrible. We had I just bought my 2016 truck. That was the first new truck I ever bought, and towing our 44-foot enclosed trailer. That was loaded down with the truck and a whole bunch of
Whatever
spare
else we
parts.
could get in it.
Then Rick Fox had his mega cab and gooseneck with all the sled pulling stuff on it. Then Larson was towing the little enclosed trailer with more tools, and I can't even remember what all we had. So we had 3 trucks and trailers. We took the whole shop and just rolled out of here and headed
we took
west.
probably a dozen people out there. I mean,
I
it
think
was
there was 12 of us. I mean, it was 3 trucks full of people.
Yeah.
And we drove straight through. Didn't stop for the night. Just hit the road, swapped drivers, and rolled. And on the way out, through Wyoming, I think, we ran into some weather, and they don't put salt on the roads. They put sand. And being the convoy we were running, Larson's truck was in the back, and all the sand from the front 2 trucks.
Larson and Rick got paint damage.
Just absolutely sandblasted the front of their trucks. Like we got out there, Larson looked at his front bumper, and the paint looked like it had a sandblaster run against it. You could pop his hood, and you could see the grill marks on the intercooler because the intercooler was silver, where all the paint was sandblasted off of it. All the front edges of his doors were sandblasted, and Larson ended up getting a whole paint job. Insurance paid for a paint job out of that whole deal.
Yeah, and we start talking to the people that live out there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, during the winter, you don't follow close. You keep your distance."
Right. And Rick's truck was white, so I don't think he noticed it as much. But he still had some damage. But he wasn't the last one in line. But that was a long
It
drive.
really was a long trip. But yeah, getting out there, like rolling into Utah, man, or into Salt Lake, like that's beautiful. Like that is God's country out there. It's really where they had the fairgrounds, where they had the sled pull and
the dyno.
I mean, that was like there was mountains, snow-capped mountains in the background, and for us flatlanders, like that was pretty cool stuff. And I mean, really neat setting out there. But I just remember going out, like Industrial hosted the whole thing. We didn't know what to expect. Like, Industrial's a brand that's been around longer than we've probably known what diesels were. And, you know them from afar, but you don't really know anybody. And I think UCC did a really good job of bringing a lot of the East and the West together as far as the diesel industry and just getting to know each other, really.
Right.
Like, I mean, we had no idea who the Industrial guys were, and we go out there, they're great hosts. They have a nice big shop, and I don't know, I think that side of it was just good for the industry and kind of like got everybody
the first, we had, I mean, no offense, Sean Baca, but we had preconceived notions about you. It's like, you see all the guys out west and their spiked hair and tattoos, and they're talking about 2,000 horsepower, and we're just like, whatever. But you go out there, and like Sean and his dad, I mean, they were just so glad that we were there, and they were very, there was good hospitality, and we just had a good time with everybody. It's just everybody was excited to see each other. Right. But one thing I remember when we got out and we really started looking after the first day and everybody was about there, we're like, I think we overthought this, because everybody just had their regular full weight
Everybody was
truck.
shooting to make 1 million horsepower and shoved it in their street truck and was going to go.
I mean, there was like Danik St. Pierre, which was Ryan Milliken had put together for the Hardway team. It had a gutted interior and had shed some weight, and I don't know. There was Dimitri Chavis Fryer.
Sure enough,
Chavis actually had a pretty big build with the Diesel Brothers.
Yeah.
Had a regular cab, big turbo setup, but
Right.
it just was not tested.
Yeah.
But really, we missed a good part of this because if you go back to a month and a half prior, we had done the reveal for our truck at Rudy's. So
I totally
wanted to
missed that.
we wanted to run Rudy's. We wanted to run Pro Street and
Right.
ODSS. So we went to Rudy's, and that was the debut. That was the first time the truck was ever on the track.
We also decided that this thing's going to be tested, unlike most of our DPC builds that were
Right.
very last minute or whatever. But yeah, that was really cool because we had kept this thing under hat all winter. And I just remember the ride down. I mean, we were like, kids in a candy store. Like,
We broke the internet on the way down there. 'Cause I made a post, and I had put the quad cab and I put the Pro Street truck together in one picture. And I forget what I said. I said, meet
Something about
the,
my white truck,
Yeah,
I
meet
think,
the
yeah.
new and improved hashtag my white truck, and pretty much just listed all the 500% overs and triple CP3s and triple turbos, and everybody was like, amazed. And then you roll into Rudy's, and that was the first everybody ever saw it.
Yeah.
And we went a 569 that weekend at 129, but the compressor cover was not, the manifold compressor cover wasn't on the center section correctly, because we had it together, boost tested it, and then we took it apart for something to add a boost gauge sensor or something, drill and tap the cover, and must have, like, when we put it together, not got the V-band in there right. And so we had a huge boost leak all weekend. We ran a 569 and then came back from Rudy's, and the next weekend went test and tuning here at Killcare with the compressor cover fixed. And we had to send the turbo up to Chris at ED and have him fix the wheel because the wheel had just touched the cover. And first pass out, it goes a 527 in the, or
827.
827 at I can't remember.
I don't remember the
in
mile per
quarter.
hour in the quarter, yeah.
And that was a 539 in the eighth.
Okay.
And that put all the UCC guys on notice.
Yeah.
So when we rolled in at Industrial, I just remember a couple of those guys coming up and be like, I think you guys got this one beat. They're like, we don't have anything for you to run deep in the eights. Because that was where guys were, the Super Street trucks weren't even running the eights at that point.
Well, and I mean, first time we put that thing on the quarter-mile track, we outran our cert by, over 2/10.
Right.
So that was the next question. Like, if we go quarter-mile racing, like, are we just stuck there? Like, what's going to happen? That was before the 25.6 cert came about. But so yeah, that was a really pleasant surprise to see that all of our work paid off, and like it was going as fast as we wanted it to. But yeah, I mean, that first weekend at Rudy's was super awesome. I think, the fall before, Chase Lunsford had run like a couple of back-to-back 560s, and that was like the fastest anybody had ever been in Pro Street. And then Aaron was also doing bounties for, like, if you got in the 560, I think that spring, if you ran in the 560s, you'd get paid the bounty. So we were running the front of the pack, first weekend out. We went to the semifinals, I think it was.
Yeah.
So we were tickled pink with that. And, I don't know, we were somewhat equally bummed and, more surprised once we found out that our turbo cover was never right.
We were like, we could have like dominated the first weekend out, but
shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yep.
So,
that's racing. But no, I don't know. I have a lot of good memories of Industrial there, and just walking around and looking at everything, and I don't know, it's fun. Like, it was a very different feel from DPC. It was, the first day was drag strip.
Yeah.
I don't remember much about that. The fastest we went in Salt Lake was a 850.
I want to say, somewhere right around that. I know it didn't go near as fast as we did here.
Which we were leaving at the same boost we were here, but the higher elevation was making it bog in the 60-foot, basically over-fueling because there wasn't as much air. Then the 60-foot slowed down, which slowed everything else down.
If only we'd have known then what we do now about nitrous. We'd have just, turned the nitrous up a little bit on the hit, and we'd have had our 60-foot.
We didn't even run nitrous. racing.
Oh, right.
Yeah, it was all fuel only.
Right.
827 and 850 was all fuel only.
Oh, don't get me started on some of the nitrous things we did and didn't do in some of those early years.
But one story from the drag strip that I remember, so obviously I was driving, and I come down the end after the one pass, I threw the chutes, and I come around to the end, and I normally stop and waited for the guys to come up.
The few times that we're new to chutes.
Right. Yeah. But the guy at the track, I stopped, and the guy at the end is like motioning me like to get out of here, and I was like, well, I got chutes on the ground, and I was like, wow, screw it, I'll just drag them back to the pits. So I just took back off because the guy at the end of the track was like yelling at me to get out of the way. I didn't understand what he was meaning. I think all he meant was just move forward a couple 100 feet. And so I drove back to the pits, but I didn't realize when I turned the corner, I caught the sign with the chutes, and I drug the, I don't know, whatever. It was like a big
some kind of triangle sign,
or road sign they had set up. I can't even remember what it said, but showed up at the pits with dragging a sign. That was a good time.
Did a nice job of rubbing a couple holes in our new chutes or one new chute at least. So.
It was a rookie move of racing for sure, but it was a good time.
Yeah. And at that point, we figured out that, we should always send somebody up there to help you or make sure that the top end guy is going to get it or whatever.
Right.
But.
I can't really remember much else about the specifics about the drag strip day. I mean, I think we made a couple attempts. I know the first pass we went at 863 and the second one went at 850. And then I think we just kind of sat it out and waited.
I mean, I know we didn't go as fast as what we had hoped, but we still had a good gap on the field.
Right.
The thing that was nice about UCC is everything is scored performance based. It's not just position based. So even if you're in first, if you can go faster, you can pick up more points.
Right. It was a points based on if you start at 13 seconds and then the faster you go, the bigger the gap was between 13. There was a multiplier in there. The faster you went than 13 seconds, it would increase your score. So if we put a whole second gap on second place, and then we ended up with, 170 point lead or something like that. And then the same way it went for the dyno. Whereas DPC, all you had to do is beat the other guy by half a tenth, and you went 500 points for first, 490 for second, 480 for third. And so it kept the whole field a lot closer at DPC. Whereas UCC, if your performance excelled the whole field, you really put a gap on points.
Yeah, I just remember they had a whole drivers meeting and kind of a get-together meet and greet the night before at Industrial. And if I remember right, that's where we found out how the scoring system was going to work. Like, we had no idea how the scoring stuff was going to be. And I just remember kind of the chatter of, well, how's that going to work? But I really kind of like it better than strictly, position-based.
If you have two trucks,
drag racers, we would probably argue that drag racing could be scored a little bit more heavily, but I guess it is Northwest Dyno Circuit that puts it on, so it kind of makes it.
The dyno is huge in scoring. If you cannot score, you can win the sled pull and you can win the drag race, but if you don't do good on the dyno, you have no chance of winning because the dyno is scored very heavily at UCC.
Yep.
Going from drag strip day to dyno day.
Started out with, chucking a wheel bearing or something on the trailer on the way out there or something?
It was bad. We drove 27 hours 2 days before and everything's fine. Then going on a, 40-minute trip over to the where we dynoed, we lost a wheel bearing on the trailer and the tire was literally bouncing down the highway. And Rick called me and he's like, so you got a tire bouncing down the highway. So I
don't remember just a whole lot about that other than there was a trailer place beside Industrial that fixed it then I think the next day.
They redid the hub.
We were able to get the thing to the track and back without, with 5 tires instead of 6. But went out there, we did the dyno. The dyno was an interesting day.
Ryan Milliken was one of the first ones, and he did 2,060, like just a tick over 2,000, and he was pumped.
Yeah.
And he's like, he hit his goal. He wanted to hit 2,000, and then there was 7 or 8 guys that beat him? No, not beat him maybe, but
I can't
7
remember.
or 8 that hit 2,000. But Ryan had a good torque number, and we were thinking that if somebody could hit 2,000, that would be amazing. And here, like a whole bunch of guys knocked 2,000 the first year. I'd have to actually pull up this. It'd be interesting to pull up that sheet.
Daniel Pierce made a really cool fireball.
Yep. Yeah, that was
crazy. I just still remember like people just bailing out of that truck, and I mean it was.
Aaron Rudolph with Rudy's made a huge number for a 6.4. I remember hearing that thing, and Jesse Warren's 6-liter.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd never heard Fords make those kind of sounds. And they beat the rod bearings right out of it in one hit, I think.
Well, I feel like Rudy's made really close to 2,000 that year,
so.
like 1,900 or something. Like it was an impressive.
Believe it.
Yeah.
Yep.
It really was an impressive number.
But I think they hurt the motor.
I think so too.
Yeah. I think Jesse Warren laid 16 or 1,600 for a 6-liter, and we're like, a 6-liter's doing 1,600. Like, this is impressive.
Right. Yeah, and then we got on the dyno, and we got a decent number out of it, but that's kind of the first where our cutout issues started showing their ugly face. We'd get up on the dyno, and you'd watch it, and it would like just chop out, like just kind of.
Just a high RPM is just like a whop, 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 and you could see the actually puffs of smoke. Like in some of the pictures, you see the smoke pulsing, which we did 2211 and 3,400 foot-pounds of torque. It was it second or third?
I don't remember. I honestly don't remember how we placed on any of that stuff.
It was second or third place, I believe, but we couldn't figure out what the cutout issue was, which we figured out later. It was the ECM ground we had fastened to the custom or the new engine mounts we had made. We had made those just to make it. We were trying to save weight, I think.
Yeah, well, and rigid mount.
Right, and we had just run the ECM ground to there with a self-tapper. Well, it was tight, but self-tappers do not ground well. And all I did is took the self-tapper out and drilled all the way through and put a nut and bolt on it, and it took care of our cutout issues, but we didn't find that out until we got back.
Right. And that same issue haunted us then in the sled pole.
Yeah.
Was it both sled poles? I believe the truck ended up cutting out. And like the
Not
first
cutting out, shutting off.
Shutting off, right.
Foot on the floor, the truck's flying, everything is going good, and all of a sudden it's just like I hit the kill switch, it just shut off.
Yeah, so going to the sled pole, we got the dyno in. Actually, was that a different day?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was a different day from the dyno, but still at the same place. And before the sled pole, it was pouring rain, like just dumping. And the original track wasn't workable, so they ended up pushing the mud off of a track kind of off beside it. But really, it ended up being a pretty good track.
Yeah.
I mean, they have a lot more sandy soil than what we do, but all that moisture really honestly helped build that track a lot better than I think what we would have had otherwise.
I'd like to try find that video, because the second hook, I mean, it was going to go down the hill.
It was going to go along. Like that sled was not an East Coast sled either, and I really don't think it would have stopped us.
I just remember feeling the sled hit, and normally when you feel the sled hit, you have like 20 feet until you're stopped, and like the sled hit, and it just kept going, and about 320 feet, the truck shut off, and we coasted to 360 or something like that. We were cooking it.
Right. And on that second pass, I remember I was maybe close to the 100-foot mark, and look under the truck, and I just see a geyser of trans fluid just hitting the ground, and I'm like, great. But apparently there was enough fluid in the truck to get it down to the end, because the transmission never slipped. But we had one of our quick connect lines had blown off, and was just, cooler lines straight to the ground, just pouring it out. But
we had put quick connects in the cooler fittings so that if we had to pull the trains between rounds, we could just unplug it and we didn't have to unthread anything. But one of those just literally blew apart and was just shooting on the ground.
Yeah.
And we took those things out after that. It was a good idea, but we didn't know if we didn't get it latched right, because we didn't have it apart.
I kind of think maybe just mixing up brands of hose versus the ends may have been some of our problem too. I don't know, but haven't really used. Well, actually, we use them in the S10 now, and they haven't given us any issues. When we talked about
DPC video before this one, we talked about having a good truck, a good team, and a little bit of luck. That was that little bit of luck. With that cutout issue and with the transmission line blowing off, like that could have cost us the win in 2016. But that's a little bit of luck carried us through, I guess.
Yeah. Every year we had needed that little bit of luck, and
Yeah.
we had our share of mishaps and everything. But yeah, I don't even remember, like, I mean, was it if I remember right, Danik could have beat us, but would have had to outpole us by like 40 feet maybe.
Yeah.
I think is how it
So
came
we
down
pretty
to.
much, we came down after we had pulled, we had calculated how
Yeah.
many feet he would have to beat us by. So we stood right where we ended, and we knew that he would have to beat us by, whatever, 20 feet, 40 feet.
Yeah, we were all hanging down at that spot.
And they had Chase Fleece driving,
Right.
Danik's truck, because he had a lot more sled pull experience. And I remember seeing that truck coming, and he was coming with a steam.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, no.
Well, if I remember right,
And then you just see
he luckily went for hero gear that was a little plenty much too. That didn't quite.
Yeah, well, it was spinning out. It was
Was
just,
it?
he had
Okay.
373 gears, and so it was
Okay.
just blazing the tires. So when the sled hit, he didn't have as much
Momentum,
leverage
yeah.
on the tire. We re-geared the truck for the sled pull, which we had covered this before, just so that when you're up at RPM, your wheel speed is caught up to track speed. And that makes so when the sled hits, it takes longer to break traction and stop.
I think they did
momentum.
end up beating us in the sled pull, but by not enough to
Right,
take
just-
the overall
yeah.
point. So
I do remember standing at the sled pull, and that was the first I really got to know Nicole, which is Derek Rose's wife. That was a funny
she
story.
doesn't at all get fired up or into anything,
Yeah.
and especially when her husband's truck catches on fire, she's like laid back and chill, right?
What? Are you kidding me? Get the fire extinguisher! Derek comes down there like guns blazing and gets to the end, and the truck's on fire, and the track staff is like looking at the truck burning, and she is wondering where the fire extinguishers were. But it was a good time. We still give her a good hard time about that one. But
I love it,
She
though.
was
Like, I
she
mean,
was fired
If
up.
there was ever a points question you had or anything of that point, like she kept track of everything.
She had a notepad. She knew
Yeah.
what everybody made on the dyno, what everybody's time was. Like they played to win, and that's why we still to this day give Derek Rose such a hard time, because we know he wants it so bad, and and we're proud of what he has done with his truck. He's done a great job.
Yep. It's definitely a lot more fun when you have, good competition,
Right.
and you can be friends and whatever off the track, but it's also a lot of fun to be able to,
Tell him that he needs to bring his nitrous on at 0.4 seconds. No, lockup. Bring lockup in at 0.4.
0.4 seconds. But
Yep.
yeah, we've had a lot of fun just going back and forth on some of that stuff. So
I don't know. What are other, this stuff is always fun to try to jog back the memories and the stories that you make out of that stuff, because that's really what makes these events fun.
One other thing that I remember is, I believe it was after the event was wrapped up, we went to Applebee's late at night because it was like the only thing that was open anymore. And that was the night that the executioner was first talked about.
Yeah.
I remember Drew showing us some ideas and some drawings and stuff that they had, and we were like, man, that would be cool.
Right. Well, that was when he had drawn up the executioner with a dual overhead cam setup.
Mm-hmm.
That's all stuff that we would still love to do at some point, but again, it's pretty far outside of the box.
I mean, if somebody wants to fund, a winter of machining and a winter of engine dyno testing, then we'll gladly do it.
Right. Yep. There's plans drawn that would be potentially a lot better head flow.
Right.
If you could actually get a dual overhead cam setup working. It's been drawn up since 2016, so just hasn't actually materialized.
Right.
But altogether, winning 2016 was very important for us. Braxton was just born. He was a 1 month old or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife had flown out and met us out there.
Oh,
and so,
yeah, I'd about forgotten about that.
Kelly
Yeah.
and Braxton were out there. And so they didn't drive with us because had a 1 month old and didn't want to spend 30 hours in the truck.
I think Dad flew out with her, right?
Yeah, I
think.
believe so. And then I just remember we won $10,000 I think to win.
I can't remember.
But
And
I
we-
just remember coming back and we
had
spent-
also had somebody build the upstairs for us while
Yeah.
we were gone, so
Yep.
that's a good chunk of money.
Right. I never realized how much money it costs to shut down the shop. I only looked at the travel expenses, hotel, all this things, the money we're spending going on this trip, but I didn't realize how much revolving cash flow we were making at the shop, to where all of a sudden I take 12 people out of the shop and we're not making any income. Like we came back from UCC. If we wouldn't have had a check to put in the bank, we'd have been broke.
Yeah.
So we were broke anyway. So we had put all, but that accelerated our business even more than what the DPC did, because it was like coming from a street truck into a big competition. And that was still very much like 2016. That was still farm boys between cornfields competing with big shops. And now in 2022 has pretty quickly flipped to where people are like, they want somebody to beat Firepunk. They're like, wait, we're still the farm boys between cornfields. We've just have a couple years of experience that has given us a lot bigger platform.
Yep. You learn a lot in a short amount of time when you have a lot of good people around you that you lean on, and really, like, don't ever stop asking questions. Like, there's never a question. Well, I shouldn't say never a stupid question, but
They're stupid questions.
But
hang on a second. If you can't find the answer on Google, then it's not a stupid question.
You've never screenshotted a Google search to answer somebody's question, have you?
No, I get asked some questions that you can copy and paste into Google, and it gives a perfect answer. If you need to ask that question, then just you ask Google.
Yeah. So I don't know, do we want to get into 2016 racing at all? Or, I mean, there's not really that much with racing.
We went on to win Pro Street points, but I mean, there was quite a bit that happened in 2016, because remember at Scheid, we blew the bottom end out of that motor. That's where we talked about making all that torque. Right. We literally split the main webbing of the stock block failed. So there's tie bolts from the deck plate coming down from the top that are like 12 inches long, and those stop about an inch above where the main studs from the bottom come up, and it split right at the top of the main studs and literally just tried to drive the crank out the bottom. So we learned there that we have to, when we redid it then, that's when we
upped turbo sizes some, I think.
Increased turbo size, tried to move the power curve to the right. There was a lot of learning in that whole thing.
There's, back up to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
That was when we first, had a cracked head.
Yeah.
And so, like, we were running really hot, didn't know it, didn't have any EGT sensors. And so we did a round of qualifying, parked the truck, everything was fine, go to start the truck up to go up to the next round.
And the starter just clicked.
And we're like, what is going on? We changed the starter, same thing. And finally we're like, well,
has to be hydrolock.
Could be hydrolock. So we ripped it down, pulled injectors out. Sure enough, crank it over, just water geysers up all over the canopy and everything. So we just put towels over the top of it as good as we could, and we just kept cranking it till it quit blowing water out. We jammed the injectors back in that thing, and we
drained coolant out of it, drained water out of it.
Right, drained the water out and made it back up for first round of racing. Was that the year that we went sevens?
No,
that wasn't until the next
2017.
Year. Okay.
But we ended up finishing the race day. But then when we came back, we pulled the head, tried to find the problem, and here the exhaust ports were all had hairline cracks from the exhaust port in.
Right.
We're just running way hot with these small little.
Ever since then we've never run anything hot, right?
No. But that's when we decided to go to water injection.
Yeah.
Drew's like, we got to cool it down. Okay.
Right. And at that point he said, you're not going to be able to do water injection unless we either go to the dyno and do a lot of testing, or else you need to get a data logger on the truck.
Right.
So
put a race back on the truck and got 6 EGT probes and got water on the truck and got it cooled down. Yeah, it was a learning curve, because we tore up the head in Oklahoma. That was in June. And then end of August at Scheid, we broke the crank, so we fixed it. And we're back in the track for Rudy's in the fall. And we won Pro Street points. I mean, it was close points. It was us and Chase Lunsford, I think, in the finals.
Right.
He went red against me in the finals.
What? Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I know it came down to that last race, and we were able to squeak it out. But
then that was
lots of learning then, and then the whole next winter we opened a whole different can of worms with a couple of different projects. But we'll probably just go into that in the next video, I would guess.
I would say we'll probably wrap this video up, because this was kind of UCC in 2016. The next series, we want to go into 2017, all the changes that we took 2016 and what we learned from it, and then we kind of did a reset and made those changes. And then the big talk was making 3,000 horsepower for 2017. And we really wanted to make sure that we could still be able to win or be able to play at the top of UCC 2017. And we knew we didn't have anywhere near 3,000 horsepower capable setup. So the next series, we're kind of going to go over 2017 and the Sigma motor that we decided to put together and chasing that 3,000 horsepower, what all went into that. There's a lot of stories that come out of that. Then also 2018. So that's the next video. We're going to do 2 parts on the UCC thing because we just felt like all of the stuff we talked about in 2016, if we go into 2017, we'd be here for another hour.
Yep. Well, yeah, it's a lot of fun reminiscing, and I guess we'll get the memory bank fired up for the next one. And if you guys have anything else you'd like us to add to it, make sure you leave it in the comments, and we'll see you guys next time.
All right.